Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, distributed through the Real Ag Media Network and powered by the Hebert Group of Companies. Quick shout out to our lead sponsor, Maverick Ag, covering the financial consulting, benchmarking, and business building needs of Canadian and U.S. farms to stack the deck in their favor. As well, a quick shout out to the Maverick Ag Insurance Brokerage. As we all know, it's coming back into talking about insurance for next year already. So we are a distributor of Global Ag Risk Solutions Private Insurance in Western Canada. So for more information, reach out to maverickag.com. All right. So I am your host, Evan Shout, with my co-host, Kristjan Hebert here, and we have a special guest. So I'm going to throw it into your lane, Kristjan. You can do the big intro here.
Yeah. So folks, today we've got Craig Lothian on. I think the way I'll do the introduction is, we've had a lot of guests to do with agriculture. Evan and I banter back and forth. We had John Stackhouse on from RBC, and it actually surprised us, all the questions we got when you get someone outside of agriculture that pays a pretty close attention to the industry. So Craig and I have known each other for a while. He grew up really not that far from me, just on the other side of the Kenosee Golf Course in Carlisle, Saskatchewan. But Craig, I wanted to have you on to kind of go through some of your story, right from, growing up in Carlisle having your parents run the bakery, which is a small business, probably, I would assume, gave you a real good habit for getting up early, which then led to some pretty interesting stories in the oil patch in Southeast Saskatchewan. And maybe we'll even get to you not wanting to get out of a chair beside Mario Lemieux one day in your life too. But The big thing is let's go through your story and let's have you start with taking us right back to living in Carlisle, and we'll see what kind of entrepreneurial gems we can pull out of the next 45 minutes.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And I need to correct your story a little bit. There's certainly a very, very, very close connection to the Carlisle Bakery. My dad started working there when he was 12 years old. After school, I'm assuming. I think he was going to school still, and he started at the same time as his twin brother. And my dad did work there for, I think, 25 years, somewhere in that range. His twin brother, my dad has passed away a while back, but his twin brother is still the owner of the bakery, or became the owner of the bakery, and he'll turn 90 this year. So there is a very, very close connection. My dad left the bakery, went in to business with another brother of his, and they bought the McLeod's store in town and became a McLeod's True Value store. So I guess my entrepreneurial journey started by, I think the recollection I have is putting together every bike and barbecue that we sold when I was about 13 years of age. And I don't know, it seemed like I had to work after school every day. There wasn't a lot of time for golfing at that golf course that you mentioned there when I was a kid. But I also grew up, to give myself any kind of street cred in the ag industry. I think I need to weave this into the story, in that my mom died when we were really young. I lived in town. I think I was 3 years old. And most of my childhood, I grew up living a great deal of the time with my grandparents on their farm, which was about 12 miles from Carlisle, closer to Manor, Saskatchewan, getting closer to your part of the world, up there in the Fairlight area. So, that's my background in farming. And I've said to people, I'm very, very well educated in farming, as long as farming hasn't changed at all since about 1979. I know a lot about farming with a 4020 John Deere open air tractor and a Massey Harris Super 92 combine, also without a cab, and 3/4 of a section of land was kind of a standard farm back then. So have there been any changes since then, guys?
I think you just aged all three of us in about 30 seconds there. So
I don't know. 170,000 or so farms in Canada would still qualify to that metric. They just might have a better piece of equipment, but no, that's the truth.
I wish I still had that 4020 John Deere tractor, however.
That would be a good investment to have right now, actually, just polished out at the ranch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think, Craig, why don't you, how old were you and when did you first kind of endeavor? I'm assuming you probably started working in the oil patch, but then when did you make the jump to some of the other companies? And like I said, I know Villanova is one of the first ones, and then Keystone and Lex, but walk us through how that all happened.
Yeah. So I went, I grew up around oil, and the Carlisle, has always had an oil presence. There's still a significant oil company presence in the town. They were, when you lived in Carlisle and you understood the importance of the sector to a community. My dad's hardware store was very successful, and in terms of key generators, tourism was certainly a big one with 2 lakes nearby. But the oil industry was far and away the biggest factor in terms of making his business a success. And then I had some relatives that were in the oil business in Calgary, and kind of learned a little bit about it from there. Went to university and went into law school. Not sure why I thought I wanted to be a lawyer at that time. Graduated from law school, had a job offer, an assigned job offer from a law firm in Calgary to go work out there. Graduated in 88, so I would have got that offer in my second year. And before I finished my studies, my third year of law school, I got a letter from them saying, the oil market has crashed, and we've laid off 60% of the lawyers in our oil and gas section, which I think was about 25 or 30 lawyers, and we're prepared to honor your articles. So if you want to come to Calgary and work for, I think it was $1,300 or $1,400 a month, we'll take you for 12 months of articles, and then we're gonna let you go, and we're letting you know now that we're gonna let you go. So that didn't seem like a very good plan. I had decent amount of student debt at the time, and so I had to pivot. I had to scramble to try and find a job, because everyone gets hired for articles in their second year. Found a little firm in Regina, started working there, but didn't really give up the dream of being an oil and gas guy. So I just, had no oil and gas clients, but I went out to Calgary. There wasn't an internet back then. I couldn't search online and find, who are the oil companies, but you could get information from Energy and Mines, as it was known then, and see who was drilling in the province. And I would just literally cold call or door knock in office buildings in Calgary and say, I had a business card, and I prepared some sort of a little brochure, and I said, hey, I'm a lawyer. I'm doing oil and gas work in Saskatchewan, in Regina. I'm not sure whether you have somebody out there or not, but if you don't, happy to do your work. And it was amazing how many people said to me, yeah, we do a lot of, legal work in Saskatchewan, and we have a lawyer there, and I can't remember his name or her name. We've never met them, and built an oil and gas practice, essentially, doing that word of mouth. But I had I was really interested in the industry. So after about, building that, becoming a partner in a law firm, I think I realized probably about the first day I practiced law that I hated practicing law. And it didn't take me a lot longer after that, maybe, to realize that I wasn't really probably that good at it either. I think it was okay, but I wasn't great. My daughter, who's my lawyer and a lot of stuff now, is a way better lawyer than I am, or ever was. And I was always spending, whenever I was working on an oil and gas file, was spending more time looking at what they were doing in their business, how they were doing it. You could see, you had a pretty good idea how much money they were making, and I realized, I was working a lot harder at times, and certainly at their beck and call at all times. And they were more successful probably than I was. So it took me about 5 years before I started to pivot. First company was actually called Flatland, appropriately enough, being in Saskatchewan. And it was a guy who was from Calgary and started a company. All the lands were in Saskatchewan, raised a little bit of money, and we invested in it. We didn't have a lot of money at that time. And, I always talk about my commitment level at that time. And I was pretty committed to the investors because we put a second mortgage or took out a secured loan against our house at that time. And my wife still is a lawyer, but was a practicing lawyer, a litigator who also did family law, divorce law. So, when people would ask me, are you committed to this? I told them I'm extremely committed. So we started the company. The fellow in Calgary at one point decided he wanted to sell it. Oil was at, I think, a 30-year inflation adjusted low at that time. And I just said, I don't think this is a good time to sell. So I raised a bit more money, typical friends and family, bought out all the people that kind of came in from his side, and moved the operation to Regina. And then for a period of time, I kept one foot in the law practice, which was on Hamilton Street, and our office was on Broad Street. And I'd scamper back and forth from one office to the other, trying to be in both worlds. But I fell in love with the oil industry, and I fell in love with the people, the characters, legendary characters in the Canadian energy sector and beyond. And it didn't take me very long to decide that I think my true calling, and certainly where my heart was in the oil industry. So we started with Flatland, sold that 3 or 4 years later, and had I think about a 2.5x on that. Seemed to be kind of easy. You put your money in. Had a lot of bumps on that road in that company, but ultimately had a good result. And then at the same time found an asset run by a guy who I'd done coincidentally a little bit of legal work, and he was out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. And he had started a company in 1954, incorporated in Saskatchewan, called Keystone Petroleums. And at that time they had, I think, about 130,000 acres of mineral title in Saskatchewan. And he was 89 years old, and he was looking to sell the company. And so I kind of, while I was selling Flatland, I was raising additional money, and ended up buying that company, raised $5.9 million, I think was the purchase price on the company. I raised about half of that from myself, friends and family, a few other contacts that I had. I think one of the cool stories is I took the financials pro forma for the company to KPMG, actually, to get them to take a look at it. And I think I needed a rolled up pro forma financial statement. And at that time, there were 4 partners at the KPMG office in Regina. And the partner that I had, Mark Lang at the time, he said he's interested in investing if there was any room, and his 3 partners all came in as well. And that was, of course, before the accounting community decided that they had restrictions against doing stuff like that. They were also, of course, then they were my auditor for the company ultimately. And they all had to sell except for one who had kind of been, maybe moving towards retirement. And he was able to hang on to it. And he took great glee over the years being able to tell the other 3 partners how much money he made in that company. And then, you can Google it. And when you've raised money and stood in front of as many investors as I have over the years, you get kind of used to standing up there feeling a little bit naked. When I remember distinctly the first time somebody asked me how much I was investing in whatever company it was we were raising money for. And I told him a number, and he said, yeah, okay, so what? But like, how much money have you got? And you're in a room full of people, and you can dodge that and, say, I used to give a pat answer saying, well, my wife was a former divorce lawyer. So, I think that's a pretty material number. But at some point, you just have to actually say, well, it's X percent of my net worth. And so you can Google this if you want to fact check it. But in April of 2022, we sold that company that we raised the 5.9 million. It was almost half of it was debt. So we really only had about 3 million of equity. We sold it for $85 million was the face value at the time we sold. But the cool part about the story is because it ultimately grew, we had 500,000 acres of fee title, had a lot more production. A little thing called the Bakken play came along in that time period, which was certainly something we never thought there was any oil, or we didn't think you'd ever get oil out of the Bakken when we bought it. So we were lucky, not smart, but we'd also pulled over 80 million of dividends out of the company over the 20 years that we ran the company. So that was an extremely successful entity. And during that time, we used it as a platform because it had all this land. We used it as a springboard or a base to create more oil companies. More when people think about oil companies that we would raise money, drill wells, hopefully find oil, build it up, usually into the 1,000 barrel a day range, and then we would typically exit by selling to a public company in Calgary. And we did 3 companies. The Keystone Petroleum ultimately became Keystone Royalty Corp, which was a land company that we sold in April of 2022. But we did 2 other Keystone Energy entities, and we did 4 Villanova companies. It became too confusing for people because I'd say to them, yeah, I'm raising money for Keystone Energy Inc. And they'd say, well, I thought you sold that. And I said, well, no, that was Keystone Energy Corp. They go, well, what's the difference? I go, well, Corp is one word and Inc. period is another word. And so we finally decided, well, we need a new brand. And my college basketball team, when I paid attention to college basketball, was Villanova. So I was quite surprised actually when the name wasn't trademarked in Canada and we were able to use that. So we created and sold 4 Villanova companies, and you guys, I think Maverick Ag has been an investor in some of those. So thank you very much for that. And we're on the 5th entity now, but I was CEO founder of the first 2, and then I was not for 1, and then I came back in Villanova 4 because a thing called COVID came along and oil went to 20 a barrel or less for a little while, and we were in trouble. And I decided I was the biggest shareholder. I was the executive chair of the board still, and decided we needed to cut costs. And when I looked around to figure out how I could cut costs, and I cut costs, I got rid of the water cooler. It's a legendary story around our office about if you think Craig isn't prepared to focus on the bottom line. I was here the day that a guy came in and he actually took all of the water bottles that we had left on a trolley, one at a time. And then he took the water cooler that had been sitting there for the last 15 years because it was rented as well. But I saved more money by firing the CEO because he was making the most, and the CEO at the time didn't really want to cut costs. Well, he didn't want to cut as deep as I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I got rid of him and stepped it back in as acting CEO. Thought this COVID thing in the market turn would be fairly short-lived. Maybe I'd do this for 6 months. So I put my hand up to the board and said, I'll do it, and I'll do it for 0. That'll be my comp. And they all thought that was a great number. They didn't have any objections to that number. And I think I was the acting CEO of that company for almost 2 years till we sold it. And every Villanova company, I think our Villanova record floats around depending on who's raising money at any given time. And but across the board, we averaged close to a 3x on all 4 of the Villanova companies that we built and sold. Keystone Royalty Corp was a 26x, not including the dividends. So, everyone says when I'm trying to raise money for Villanova's, they were always like, "Well, I want in that one." And I said, "Well, yeah, let's get a time machine. We'll go back to 2004 together, and you can do that." But our track record was really good. But in Villanova 4, we actually had a multiple on capital of 0.5. So, it stands out glaringly in terms of the rest of them, but it was a perfect example of, and I think one of the similarities between your primary business, ag, and my primary business of energy is we're price takers, and we control what we control. But we can't control the price of oil. At least I haven't been able to figure out a way to do that. And we raised money for Villanova 4. Oil was close to $100 a barrel. Land prices were off the chart. Service costs were off the chart. And then we started drilling and started producing that oil when oil was dropping, and it went down to 60 and then 50, 40. And then COVID hit and it went to 20. And even though we were able to, ride it out, we stayed alive by not having a lot of debt. I've always been very, very unleveraged in all of our businesses, and we certainly were not anywhere near trouble in terms of our debt levels. But we stayed alive by doing a significant down round, and the investors that came in the last raise made a good return. But the original investors including me, ended up losing about half their money. But
Evan, we could pull like 10 similarities about agriculture out there. There's a couple glaring ones, though. One, I thought, and we'll go deeper into this, that you actually fell in love with oil because of the characters in it, right? Which I always say that I'm addicted to the game of business. Farming just happens to be the one I picked, but people are everything, right? The relationships are how you build the business, which you didn't have internet, so you had to door knock. I could use internet, but then the characters probably not only that you partnered with, but also the ones that worked with you. But the other part, commodity business person, the price drops, he fires the CEO and even gets rid of the water cooler. Shout, have you seen a farm this year look into next year's pro forma cut costs, or are they all up in costs?
I knew you were going here, so I the one to me is the people first. I mean, yes, the price taker side, we'll get there, but the people first side is, I know both of you, and I mean, Craig, I just met you a few months ago, but I've known Kristjan all my life, and I mean, that's been, I'll call it his superpower, was the ability to network, the ability to find people to work with. And I mean, your whole story was, it started with friends and family, and then you found guys that ran businesses and you liked the guys and you took over the businesses. I mean, that's where I see the biggest similarities, obviously, between the two of you, is just your ability to find people. And I mean, in agriculture or oil and gas, we've got the same issue with a lot of people don't focus on networks and they don't focus on those bigger picture items. And to me, I mean, we built our whole business on that, Hebert. So, I mean, I want both of you to give me a comment on that side of it.
Yeah, like people is, and people I've had a lot of people ask me, you're a lawyer, recovering lawyer. What do you know about finding oil? And I only half jokingly, and I don't know who I got this from, but I couldn't find a barrel of oil at an Esso station. And I know a lot of my contemporaries over the years, I've met guys who were really good geologists, and they weren't trained geologists. The original CEO of Flatland was a pilot, a commercial pilot, but he could do mapping, he could read, he could do geology. He taught himself that. I know other people that are just, from whatever background they are, and they become very adept at engineering, trying to figure out, how to best drill a well. I didn't think that I wanted to do that. I'm interested, and actually I find myself now that I'm less involved on, kind of the day-to-day stuff. I'm not the CEO of much these days, so I have more time on my hands. And one of the things that I am spending a bit of time is I'm reading more about geology, and it's easy to find online now. So I'm trying to become more, just because I'm curious. And I think that's a key thing, is if you're curious and continue to be curious, you're going to continue to learn. So I do that. But when I was running all of these oil companies, I think if I had a superpower, it was finding good people. And then it was giving them the ability to make decisions, and giving them the ability to make mistakes. And I felt, one of the reasons that I didn't try to become an amateur geologist or amateur engineer is I felt, when you're a really small company, if I walked into a room and people have maps, a 3D map out with locations on it, and there's 5 locations that somebody who's qualified, like one of the CEOs was a geophysicist. If he picked it, or the geologist picked it, and I walked in and I put my finger on one of those 5 and said, well, what about this location over here? It just changes the room, because every one of those guys, what's the downside to them for picking? It was one of their locations anyway, but it probably wasn't their first pick. It might have been their 5th pick. Why wouldn't they pick that location? Because if they're wrong, it's my fault. And if they're right, well, it was one of their locations anyway. So I really tried to not do that. But, finding people, I think the best example of that, at one time I was flying back and forth on WestJet, back when it was a fantastic airline. I was flying back and forth to Calgary every 2 to 3 weeks, spending, a lot of nights in hotel rooms. And I noticed, I don't know, it was the second or third time, a guy on the plane that I'd seen on the way out was coming back. I think I'd often go about Monday morning, and I'd come back, Thursday night or Wednesday night or whatever. And he was a friendly guy, and he said his name, and I asked him, so what do you do in Calgary? And he told me he worked for an oil company, and I said, oh yeah, you live in Calgary? He said, no, I live in Wolseley. And I went, Saskatchewan? And he goes, well, not really. I live on a ranch north of Wolseley. And I went, okay. Tell me your story again. Your VP of I don't know what he was, but he was a geophysicist. His name's Cam Taylor. We worked together for a long time, and he now runs a company called Rock Resources in Regina, public company. And he said, yeah, I'm a geophysicist. I work for Canadian 88. And then now I'm working for a different company. And Canadian 88 was one of those legendary companies started by Greg Novell, who, you Google Greg Novell and you'll find some amazing stories. And I think, if half of them are true, the guy was both a genius and a complete lunatic. But everybody knew who Greg Novell was. And so I thought about that. I went, he got off the plane, I got off the plane, I went back and I went into work, and I thought, we rent a geophysicist from Calgary whenever we need one. And I didn't even know what the guy looked like. It was before we had video conferencing like this. So I talked to the guy on the phone. He'd select locations. He'd courier, FedEx it back, mark the seismic up, or, fax it to us, God forbid. And we would deal with that. And so I was thinking, talking to one of the guys in the office, I said, I met this geophysicist and he lives in Wolseley. We should hire this guy. And the board, and I kind of discussed that, I think, with one of the board members, was the first guy I talked to. And he said, well, we're not big enough to have an in-house geophysicist. And I said, yeah, but we're not small enough to not capitalize on a situation where you got a geophysicist living in Wolseley or near Wolseley, who's probably hating flying to Calgary as much as I did. I love Calgary, but I didn't want to be there every 3 weeks. He had a small family. I found out I had a small young family at that time. So I approached him, called him up. He came in and we had a chat. And I think it took us, about a day and a half of back and forth before we agreed. He came on board as our VP exploration. And he was a huge part of the success of that was Villanova 1 when he came in, or maybe one of the last Keystone entities. And he was a huge part of our success. But, when I've done that probably 4 or 5 times, when I find somebody that I think is a high performer or could be a high performer, I hire them and worry about where I'm going to put them later.
Shout, you heard that before?
Yeah, I'm starting to think you're copying Craig.
I hadn't even heard that story yet.
Yeah.
We were the same, right? I think, Craig, lots of times when we're looking at any types of businesses, obviously we spend most of our time in agriculture. One of the differentiating factors, right, is does the leader see the people as an investment or an expense? And don't get me wrong, I understand wages are an expense on our income statement and we got to pay attention to it. But there's a large number of your people that are actually investments, right? And when you're looking at returns in the future, and if you find the right ones, you just hire them. It doesn't matter if there's enough work or enough jobs. Usually the CEO is pretty good at creating work. We're not so good at creating good people, right? You got to find those.
Yeah.
And I think that time, and I always go back to the story of even my dad and I, right? When you say, like, not questioning your geologist, unless obviously there's probably the odd time you vetoed it, but I find one of the big issues in succession of businesses is it's not big enough for the succession yet. And so you want CEOs to start the succession plan when they're young, but they've kind of slowed down growth mode. Well, there's not 2 CEO jobs. And that's usually where a lot of successions start, hitting each other in the head. Or to be honest, there's nobody that actually even wants to be the CEO. They're just taking the job because it's their last name, right? And it kind of all goes back to your people, is find good people, find what they're good at, and then maybe trust them. And I think, Shell, you've been around Louis and I the longest. I mean, that once we kind of got to like 16,000 acres, I didn't have time to question him, and he didn't have time to question me. So it was like, is he my best person? Yeah, he is my best person. So just let him go do everything he does. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly the way I would do it, right? And I think that probably ties in with your people too, right? Is your best one specifically. You got to let them do what they're good at.
It definitely does. And, when I was thinking about this podcast, when you asked me, and I love your podcast, and that's, I text Kristjan and Evan a few times and said, something about the podcast. So they obviously know that I've been listening to it. I actually didn't. I think I jokingly talked about. I sent Kristjan a picture of the carrots that I pulled out of my garden. I have a tiny little garden and some garden boxes in my house in Regina, and I picked it and sent a picture to him with the hashtag harvest 2024 or 2024 is done. Can I get on the podcast now to talk about it? Here I am. But, in terms of what you said about people and the 2 CEO jobs, when I was thinking about similarity, you've grown your operation 40,000 acres, and it's taken you, 10, 15 years to do that?
Yep.
The building oil companies is very similar to that, in that, your business at 40,000 acres is way different than my grandfather's, 480 acre farm was back in the day, or 640 acres, I guess, ultimately. But it took, 10 to 15 years. We sold 3 oil companies in 5 years. We sold Villanova 1, Villanova 2, and Villanova 3 in 5 years. And so the changes that you had to make as a CEO to run your 40,000 acre operation, I was making that in light speed, because I was first the CEO of a company that had no production. Yeah. I had to raise money. Then I'm the CEO that drills its first well and has like 100 barrels a day. And then, 6 months, 8 months later, in one of the companies, I'm the CEO running a 500 barrel a day company. Then I'm a CEO of a 1,000 barrel a day company running 2 rigs full time, except for the spring breakup period, or, this is an amazing stat. They shut down oil rigs when it hits occupational health and safety, shuts them down when it's minus 41. minus 40, no, minus 39, still good, minus 41. So, but there's a ton of activity going on in an oil company when you're running 2 rigs. You would have, by then we would be staffing up for that. And then in a snapshot of time, blink, then you sell, and I'm back to running, I'm the CEO of a company with no oil again. So the curve is the same, but the incline's a little steeper.
Yeah.
And I had to be a much different CEO at each phase of that than I was previously. And I think, frankly, if any of my former senior management people end up listening to this, they'll all be laughing or shaking their head and going, yeah, no kidding. But I was a much better CEO at the beginning. I was very good at, strategy, direction, good at raising money, and good at putting the people in their places. I wasn't good at HR. I'm not good at HR. And we never really got big enough. I finally did, in one entity, had enough people where I did hand off the HR role, and, to the extreme satisfaction and pleasure of everybody that worked with me, because I'm horrible. I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing because you're bad. Yeah. I hired my CEO, let's call him farm manager, COO, when we were like 8,000 acres and pay. If I'd have showed you what I gave him for a base salary at 8,000 acres, not only would every accountant, but including you, would shake your head at me. And it was because this exact thing. I was like, I'm going to start firing people every morning if I have to deal with this. Because you're looking at all the strategy and the raising money, and you got all these $1 million decisions to make. And then you're getting pulled over on whether we can order 5 cans of brake clean. And I know it was important to the people, right? But I couldn't separate what was important to the business and then important to the people and continue to be a happy person.
Right.
Well, right. Important to them and important to you are often 2 different metrics. And, and I think the thing that drove me the most crazy, and I've certainly mellowed a lot. I'm 62 now, so I've, my wife probably thinks it's time I matured. I'm getting there. But I just felt like no one wanted my job. You talked about 2 CEOs. I didn't seem to see a lot of people wanting my job when we had to go out and raise, 25, 30, 40 million, 50 million for one of the companies that we started. I think 75 million was the most we ever raised as a start, which was a company that didn't work out. So, go figure. No one really wanted that role, but they wanted it when, things were, it was clear we were going to be successful. We had money coming in, lots of production, lots of revenue coming in. Then it seemed like I had people, that were at the VP level or wherever who, were pushing to say, I think I need to move up, and there wasn't really anywhere else but my job. And, I didn't have any problem with that. I had one guy that I said, it's good that you want to be me. You want to be the CEO. It's just not good that you tell all your friends that you're going to take my job.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a small town. And I remember seeing a quote one time, and it said, most people want to be part of they don't want to be part of the process. They just want to be part of the outcome.
Yeah.
And then I think it goes on to say, but the process is important to realize who's necessary for the outcome. We got to go through the process before we know where we're going to get. And everyone wants to get to where, where it was a successful company and you made money and investors all loved you. And, but nobody wanted to be there at the beginning.
Well, and I think, you take that back to farm.
Without a salary often. So if you have no production, it's kind of hard to be out on the road raising money for your new oil company. You don't have a single barrel of production and say, what's your salary? And, and some first guy asks you why you should invest. And then he says, what are you making right now? And you tell him a number and it seems big. And then he goes, and how much production have you got? You go, well, we don't have any.
Hey, yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, I just look at farm succession, right? I think we saw this happen. So, I mean, kind of from Louis 63, that's my dad, and I'm 41. So, I mean, there was and I would almost say from 63 to 41, that's the caveat in there where we told everybody in agriculture to go be doctors, lawyers, engineers, anything but a farmer, right? My age, a few of us started to come back. And then underneath me, right, kind of that 25 to 40, agriculture sexy again. Canola's been $20 a few times. Wheat was over 12.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back, I think, to your story in that, and it's why Evan and I harp so much that farms should pay mom and dad rent on every acre that they own. Farms should pay, mom and dad a salary. We not only do we pay those two things, we pay 5% equity on all the equity you have in the farm outside of land, because obviously you have land equity, but then you have all your other equity, and all that comes out before profit, because we think we're actually creating a monster because we've brought all these people home because of the outcome. Agriculture was pretty awesome for, to be honest, COVID wasn't that bad for agriculture. Commodities kind of went for a run after they went way down, right? And so it got really profitable. Land goes up 7, 8, 9 times, but a lot of this generation hasn't, they haven't looked at a pro forma that was severely red and said, there's only 2 ways to get out of this: grow more or cut expenses, right? Or get really good at the marketing side. And I would say too, I think, Shout, how many times have you heard Craig mention raising money, right? And in agriculture, there's 2 different ways too, right? Equity and debt. We tend to use debt more because of the land side. But I don't know, in my network, a lot of people would say it, but a lot of people that are running farms, if you ask them, what's your top 5 jobs? I don't know that any of them would say raising money. And whether you want to call that a relationship with your banker, whether you want to call that completely understanding mom and dad's land equity, and are they willing to put any of that up as collateral, right? Are you willing to talk to an investor and bring in an investor? I think it's one thing that agriculture really has to learn from the energy industry is like access to capital, and different forms of it and cash flow. They are king. Even if you have a whole bunch of land equity, do you actually know, can I walk in the bank tomorrow and borrow $10 million against that land equity if wheat prices go to $3?
Yeah.
And that knowledge, I think. Hey, Shout, what do you think there?
Well, yeah, and I mean that ties back into the relationship side. I mean, the whole raising money thing is foreign to agriculture. Let's be serious. I mean, even from a debt perspective, I mean, we created a company that does consulting for the debt side because that's the most underutilized that most CEOs or whatever, farm owners, whatever you want to call them, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why we've referred to Craig more as an entrepreneur than a business owner lately, is that we get to work with a lot of business owners. The truth of an entrepreneur is the ability to raise capital, the ability to do the network. Those are the skills that we're trying to get into agriculture. But just to flow back quick, I had one comment before, was the interesting part when you talked about scaling, Craig, was that Kristjan, like you brought Jeff on, you were what, 7,000 acres?
Yeah.
I mean, for a 7,000 acre farm today to eat a COO, I mean, what you probably brought Jeff on was unheard of. And then, I mean, I came on, we were 14,000. And I work with a lot of 14,000 acre farms today that would not bring on a full-time CFO. So, I mean, the similarities are scary when you look at, I mean, yes, it took 10 to 15 years, but the scalability and the belief in people to boost the growth, it's an interesting comparison between the energy sector as well as the rise of some of the bigger consolidated entities.
I got the same story as Craig, right? For the first 5 years, you guys both worked for me and made more money than I did.
Still do.
No, you take more money out than I do.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I was the highest paid on base salary. I was not the highest paid employee in any of the 8 oil companies that I was pretty involved, either the CEO or the founder or both. And I was not the highest paid. I was probably the 3rd highest paid in almost every one of those. And, and I had a lot of shares. I had the most options. We have something that everyone that I hired over the years when they were first time, a lot of the people that we brought into the company had never worked for an oil company before. They lived in Regina and, they worked in whatever it was they worked at before. And then they came to us, and I always said that, here's the base salary for this position in Calgary. And we gave it about a 20 or 25% haircut. And at one time we said, because it's so much cheaper to live in Regina than it is to live in Calgary. Your house is worth a quarter of what it would be worth in Calgary. And of course, that seems to have changed somewhat. But we didn't pay top dollar for sure. But then we, waived an option agreement in front of somebody. And getting back to my weakness at HR, I think I was really, really bad at explaining it, or maybe it just sounds too good to be true to an employee when you say, yeah, but, I'm going to underpay you, but I'm going to give you, 50,000 or 100,000 options in this company at a exercise price at $1, but you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to pay anything today. And, they're going to vest over ours for 3 years, and, we're going to sell the company at some point. And when you do that, hopefully it's going to be worth way more than $1. And you have a cashless exercise option. You can just get a check, or you can get shares in the new company. And I'd lose, you could just see they were drifting away. And then, I have people come back and say, yeah, but I really need another $150 a month. And for one employee, I think this was, probably when I shouldn't have been doing that job anymore. I said, you know what? All right, forget it. I won't give you any options. I'll give you $150 a month. And that $150 a month in that company costs that person, I don't know, $250,000.
Yeah.
And $250,000 taxed at a preferential tax rate, as you two former accountants well know, preferential tax rate to the income that you get, and the government hammers with a big sledge. So it's amazing how when you're hiring people, sometimes they don't get it. But that same employee, when we did the next company, was sitting in my office pounding the table, demanding more. How do I get more options?
It's funny. This has literally been taking up part of my life right now, but I've talked about it for, I don't know, 5 years, shout, hey, that I think, and we're kind of working on maybe changing some of our vision and purpose, right? Because I decided, really, I just like to grow things. That's what I like to do. Now, you need to make money to grow them, right? But you want to grow people, you want to grow businesses, you want to grow your network. We focus pretty hard on our community and Moosomin and area, right? And the industry, and I think that it really is, the rising tide is good for everybody, right? And so I said to Evan one day, and Jeff, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I need to figure out how to grow millionaires. I think if you can retire with $1 million in Moosomin, that's that would be something to be proud of, if people that work for us could retire with $1 million, right? So but the same kind of thing. And I mean, I go back 5 years, and I was no different, is that you got 2 little kids, they're running around in every sport possible. You lose sight that $150 or that $500 is what is going on the credit card every month, because everything doesn't meet. But I mean, life and your kids are a long-term game. And so it's that kind of education on how to do it. And actually, offline show, we should have a chat with Craig on some of the best structured option deals he did. It's a little tougher to do it on companies we don't plan on selling, right? But that we're just trying to entice same way.
But I'm not sure it is, Hebes. I mean, when we did mine, I mean, let's be open. We sat in a boardroom and we said, what are you going to make as a partner at MNP? And what do I need to do to get you a base salary? And do you believe in the vision and the growth after that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, to be open, I mean, my drawings, hopefully I don't need any more. They all stay the same. Yeah. And it's the growth and the future profits and the equity. And I mean, in agriculture, this is unheard of, but that's what you and I had to discuss for me to be, to walk away from a partner salary or whatever you want to call it, vesting.
Golden handcuffs.
Golden
handcuffs, I call them.
Yeah.
I can imagine you two guys, when, I think you're both accountants. I think you were both an MNP, weren't you?
Yeah.
You probably had a very similar conversation with your spouses that I did with mine.
I thought I was nuts.
I said, yeah, I'm a partner in a law firm, and I could literally predict whether I was going to make X or X times 0.4 maybe, or 0.5, just by how many days I wanted to be in the office. It was bomb proof, and then I came home one day and I said, to Pam that I think I want to quit and I want to go work for an oil company. And I went in-house for a little while with a startup company. It was on the Vancouver Stock Exchange at the time. It doesn't even exist anymore, called Strike Energy. And that was my first actual job in the oil industry. And I was kind of the in-house lawyer, in-house landman. I did a bunch of different things. They had a Regina office from a Calgary company. And but I told her I wanted to quit and go work, and it was there was just like 100%. It was going to be, either A or B. It would be a 0, and B was it might work out. And with that background that she's a former family law divorce lawyer, she looked at me and said, "Well, you should do it because I can tell you want to do it." So it was huge. That was probably the most important thing to creating the platform was getting approval from her that I could go do it. Now, it didn't hurt that she was a partner in the law firm before I was a partner in the law firm. So I think she was actually making more money than I was already at that time. So we had her to fall back on. But yeah, I don't want to, diminish the fact that and especially right now, I can see where, that $150 might have been the difference between making the monthly budget work or not. But it does help when those employees then have one success and they're still around for the next one. And they now understand the benefit of being a shareholder, the benefit of being an owner, because I've said this in every entity. I pushed options or some sort of, equity plan in front of everyone. People are different every day if they're an employee than if they become an owner. And if you can get them to think like an owner, I had people that were, so-called lower on the hierarchy who would come into me with an incredibly good idea of how to save money. And one lady came in and said, we're paying X dollars for the photocopier paper because we're buying, one box at a time, and they deliver it, company delivers it to our door. And I just made a few calls. This is, again, I think before the internet. And if we buy, there's a word for a big stack of paper, and I can't remember, a bleam or something like that. She says, if we buy, and it was, I think, 60 boxes or 80 boxes or 100 boxes, we can cut our costs in half. And I'm like, paper's not going to go bad. So we bought 100 boxes of paper and stuck it in the storage room somewhere, and we've used it. And that was just an example of an former employee who now had either options or shares or both, and they think and act differently every day.
Well, and little ideas
in your business because you're not doing a build and flip model like we were.
Yeah.
I was able to give them, it wasn't instant gratification, but if you get that 3 times in 5 years, pretty meaningful to you.
Well, we have to have it. I kind of joke that, we would build it more like your co-op equity statement, right? Here's your opening balance. Here's the 5% I guarantee you. And here's the big wins. And we can have some taxation friendliness. But I mean, I think your point is too, though, that sometimes people that run businesses are looking for big wins, and yet the price of paper, right, is a big win. Everybody has to look for those wins. I remember after our seeding meeting, the number one idea that came out of it is, could we have 3 channels on our radios so our rock pickers don't have to listen to the seeding crew who's on it all the time, running 24 hours? It's like, well, that'll cost me like $50 to make 6 people happy. And I don't want to go do that job. Right. Yeah. But I go back to spouses. I mean, Shout knows my story. I mean, we got married when we were 20 because my wife's way better looking than me, and I didn't know how much longer I could trick her. But it was the same thing that I got full support, and it was because she'd watch me come home after tax season and just be grouchy because I didn't like what I was doing every day. And yet I'd come home after seeding or harvest. And I mean, Christ, when we were starting around 24 hours, I'd be gone for 3 days at a time. I was sleeping in the tractor when it filled and come home and be happy, right? You could, just a different person. But as I was joking with these two before the podcast, I'm working on water bowls for horses right now. And I take a lot of heat about horses. That's my wife and my daughter love them. But I tell a story internally to friends that horses are actually a big part of my success. And what I mean by that is my wife was a lab and x-ray tech. So obviously they're done work at 4:30 or 5. And that was not, when I left M&P, that was not what was happening around here. I mean, we didn't have any people. We had my dad and I and one other person, and Mom and Teresa would help out wherever we could use them. But I was working the most I'd ever worked in my entire life. But my wife had horses, and she loves horses and does really good things with them. She's a damn near whisperer. So when I'd get home at 8:30 or 9 at dark, she was just getting in from being at work all day, then doing training horses and then selling them. And so that was what made me not get asked all the time, where are you? Right. Cause she had the thing that she loved to keep her busy, and focused on her goals. So it's kind of funny that what I sometimes complain about now, a four-legged animal called a horse is actually a pretty key point to where we got to.
Well, and I mean, when I left, I mean, Amy was in my favor. I mean, she'd met you before, Kristjan. She knew your vision. And so she was in my corner, but I mean, she wasn't working. We had the 2 boys just diagnosed. So we knew the costs were coming. My parents thought I was utterly nuts. But the one that really was surprising was after you and we met at crop production and we kind of discussed what it looked like. Your dad took me aside and said, just make sure you're sure on this. I mean, I believe in my son, but at the same time, this is a pretty long-term vision. So it was that your dad cared enough to have that conversation with me that probably pushed me over the line. So he probably did exact opposite what he was trying to do. But it was just that mentality was why I bought in long term, and why I still buy in long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to believe a little bit in crazy.
Sorry, I remember my dad, when I told him I was going to not be a lawyer anymore, in fairness to him, I think he grew up in Carlisle, as you mentioned, I think in a 480 square foot house. There was 9 of them. It was 2 stories because they turned the attic into a sleeping quarters for all these kids that were everywhere. And he didn't go to university. I don't know that any of his siblings, no, I don't think any of his siblings did. And when I went to university, that was a big deal. And I found out, actually, I should have known it wasn't going to be easy to tell him I was going to quit practicing law, because when I got my BA, I didn't go to my convocation. I didn't really care. I was already admitted into law school, and I knew I was going to be a lawyer. Why do I care if I have a Bachelor of Arts degree? Well, when my dad found out that there was this big convocation ceremony and somebody else, their kid was getting their degree that day, and he didn't get the right to be there, the privilege to be there. And I felt really bad because, as he pointed out, he paid a big chunk of that 3 years of university. So I should have invited him that. But when I told him I wasn't going to be a lawyer, I wasn't going to practice anymore. You could tell he was at first very disappointed. But I think I comforted him a bit by saying, "But Dad, I'm always going to be a lawyer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use elements of that law degree, and I've used it every day. And it's the critical thinking part, the communication skills that you learn as a lawyer. Having to, whether your client, you sometimes you get the good client, sometimes you get the bad client, and you need to be able to represent both of them. So to be able to kind of argue both sides of the case or the scenario is been a valuable skill. But I did comfort him by saying I was still going to be a lawyer, but I know that he was pretty shook for a little while about the fact that he wasn't sure he could tell his neighbors or the guys at Coffee Row in Carlisle his son's a lawyer anymore if I wasn't in law firm. So
yeah. Well, I don't want to tie up too much of Craig's time today, Keeb. So do you want to give a quick wrap up thoughts, I guess?
Yeah. So, I mean, I always like talking to entrepreneurs more than actually just some of the agriculture stuff, because there's so many ties. But I mean, I go back again. One is raising money, right? So what's your access to capital and how are you going to use it? 2 is people is everything, right? It's how you grow businesses. It's how you start businesses. It's how you keep businesses. It's how you cut costs, and continue to focus on those things. And, I think my final kind of question for Craig to just give a short little blurb on is, I think some of the interesting things too are, obviously you're doing a lot of investing now, and we're involved in an agriculture one, but I'll maybe save that for another chat. The one I'll go to is give us the 2 minutes on the Ronald McDonald House in Regina that you and Pam just were big parts of, and I saw that Gavin Semple kind of joined you. And I think we're both big believers in capitalism, right? And I mean, we always got to be careful that capitalism doesn't flip to kind of oligopolies, i.e., we have to deal with two railroads every now and then. But when capitalism moves towards capitalistic philanthropy, I think it changes the world, right? So just give us the 2 minutes on the Ronald McDonald House story.
Sure, yeah, and tying it in a little bit maybe to the raising money, because I want to talk about why Ronald McDonald House, but I also want to talk about how. And I've had people. I had a guy a week ago. I rolled up to something in my Ford F-150, and it's not the top F-150. It's kind of like the base model, maybe with a sunroof and leather seats. I don't know. There's maybe something a little more base than that. But he looked at me, saw me get out, and he goes, "Okay, you gave $1 million to Ronald McDonald House, and you drive a Ford F-150." He said a word that I can't say.
Yeah.
What, and then something after that.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, but I have this little hobby ranch that I like to go out to, and I have a car that's maybe a little flashier than this, but this is my my every day. I love driving that truck. I love driving it probably more than a car, and it costs like half maybe of the car. But I've raised, in prep for this, I had somebody run some numbers, and I said, man, you couldn't round that up. The total, if you take all the companies we've raised, the equity we've raised is $960 million. And that's, all the oil companies, and then more recently in our Lex Energy private equity fund. And so that, that's great. But the better part of the story is that the billion that we've raised is, returned almost $2.5 billion to shareholders, to investors. And I'm extremely proud that a lot of those investors were, teachers, and they were assistants, and they were, whatever their role was. They weren't all, high-powered businessmen who already had a lot of money, as a lot of the media would like to portray them. They were just everyday people that took a risk on a kid from Carlisle who didn't know how to find oil at an Esso station. And so it was really gratifying to be able to return, a gain to them and change their lives. And, I look back, and I had a conversation with somebody the other day about what do I look back on and what am I proud of? I'm proud that I changed the lives of a lot of people, including myself and my family, and but a lot of the employees that work for me, at least by the NDP standard, they're rich. We made them rich. We got rich together, maybe.
Good, help yourself.
Yeah. And, so that's gratifying. And then, so the how of Ronald McDonald House, I think, is as important as the why, in that Pam and I are able to donate. We committed $1 million. We've given them $500,000. The rest we're going to give them over the next couple of years as we start construction of the new Ronald McDonald House in Regina, hopefully in the next several months. And in Ronald McDonald House is, I think it hits what we support, which is children, children's health. We made a similar donation to the Jim Patterson's Children's Hospital when it was being built, and not dissimilarly on both of those, I went in with my checkbook and said, I want to give you some money. And then they said, well, we want you to be on the capital campaign. And I said, well, no, I don't want to be on the capital campaign. I'm too busy, or whatever. That was my excuse with Jim Patterson Hospital. But I just want to give you my money. And in both cases, I ended up being on the capital campaign and ended up being the chair of the board of Jim Patterson's Hospital. So yeah, we're chairing a campaign, $16 million campaign to build it. But we wouldn't have been able to give that money without the oil industry, without the energy sector. And one of the things I like to point to back in the day when, because there's certainly lots of haters out there in the energy sector, even in this province, and certainly federally, we got there's Ottawa's full of haters of the energy industry, it seems. But I think the numbers may have changed a little bit after I left the board of the Pattison Hospital. But at one point, there were 14 companies or individuals that had given $1 million or more. And Jim Pattison gave over 50 million, 50. So like he was kind of way at the top, and then everybody else was down fairly significantly. But if you looked at the 14 people that had donated $1 million or more, 11 out of 14 were either in the oil industry, their family was in the oil industry, or they were directly tied to the energy sector in Saskatchewan. Yeah. And they're unknown names like Eldon McIntyre, who was, Jared Oils in Hazelett, Saskatchewan. The Carson family in Estevan, they were Lampman, Carlisle. Yeah. The Cugnett family in Weyburn. And when you see those names, that to me, that's why we need a healthy, robust, and profitable energy sector. And we need to quit putting all the roadblocks in front of that sector, because the money will come back to your community. It came back to my dad's McLeod's True Value hardware store in Carlisle. Saw it as a kid. It comes back into this community by, we have employees, we pay, I think, maybe a little less than they make in Calgary, but we give them a lot of upside, and they make money if we make money. And we give it back to the charities in our community. And, you were behind raising money for the Mooseman Airport expansion, and you didn't hit me up on that, which I was kind of surprised. I was waiting for it. But don't think that doesn't mean that I'm not going to hit you two guys up to support the Ronald McDonald House. And I think you did the Mooseman Airport thing just because I was also involved on the campaign to raise money for the Carlisle Airport expansion about 30 years ago, when we paved it, extended it, put in a automated light system. And I think you were just jealous that Carlisle had a better airport than you did.
Frustrated me. So but I think that's how we rounded up showed is, we can talk big ideas someday, but I kind of lean the whole natural resource sector, right? Energy, critical minerals, and agriculture. They are the rural fabric of Canada. Yep. But it's not just rural, right? They drive communities, they drive charities, they drive a whole bunch of things that a lot of the world just doesn't pay attention to, right? And that's where, the Mooseman Airport I thought it was a critical service. I think locally people had to put in, $350 of town tax money. $350 is a cheap bill if your child ever needs to get to Jim's Hospital in Saskatoon fast, right? 10 million might sound like a big number. 350 is not. And it's no different than, the stories of some good friends of yours using Ronald McDonald House. That's why we get behind these campaigns. And that's why, I think the natural resource sector is so critical to Canada. And right now, we've kind of handcuffed both hands behind its back and said, why aren't you still giving us what you did 20 years ago? So we'll leave the political one to the next one, because I guess this won't get released for a couple of weeks, Shell, but we got to watch the Saskatchewan election last night. So Craig and I were texting back and forth. But, I think it's fair to say we're both big supporters of the natural resource sector. I got good friends that have done really well in energy. My best man at my wedding still in the industry, and meet more and more in the critical mineral industry. And I think it's got a lot of upside into the future with everything that's going on. But, I think it's time probably that the three industries band together to finally wield, a big hammer in Ottawa instead of going at it separately. But that might be the dream.
I like it. So I want to thank Craig again. You've set our new record for time on this. We're about 20 minutes longer than usual. So so I'll give you props for that one. And remember to like, share, subscribe. And in the end, it's just the truth about ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.